the story. Robert Amoafo is human rights advocate and former director of Amnesty International in Ghana, and he joins me on the line. Robert, thank you very much for the time. Such a sad story for you and I to discuss this afternoon. But let's talk about the reaction of the football fraternity, and also looking at just civil rights movements in Ghana. What has been the reaction?
Thank you very much for calling me on this. And of course, yes, this has been a very serious matter for us in Ghana, not only for the football fraternity or the sport fraternity, but also as human rights activists and children's rights activists. This is a very serious matter that has been taken up by the government, civil society. And as you can see, majority of the society are joining in on the hashtag that I've been giving out, because this does not only affect the child, but as a society reflects something deeper that we need to pay attention to.
Robert, perhaps you could give us a little bit of insight. How are sports academies, I beg your pardon, in Ghana currently regulated? Is there regulation, where especially when we look at this, a case of this nature, where the system seems to be failing to protect young athletes like Ransford?
Yes, there are regulations, and everyone who sets up such things must go by those regulations set by the Ghana Football Association and the Ministry of Sports, also in Ghana. And so they're expected to follow all these regulations. And I think that, of course, there are so many anomalies that go on in a number of these football academies. And people get up and just set up any academy, and they do not follow such regulations and bring up these issues. Even recruitment of these coaches have come up to be a very big issue around their ethical understanding, their certifications. To be able to be doing some of these things have come under scrutiny. But there are regulations, and I am aware that, and as you mentioned, the academy has been shut down by the regulatory body and still under investigation.
Okay. Well, we still need answers because, yes, you mentioned that there's regulation, but what do we say then about Ransford's mother, who has apparently repeatedly reported and has been pleading for help, and she was continuously ignored when it comes to the case around her son? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how it was handled by authorities and, yeah, what happened to her complaints.
I mean, the complaint was heard, and I think the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection took it up. They did an investigation. The police arrested the coach, and the coach has been released because currently the ministry they arrested the coach and then have released him because the criminal evidence shows that Ransford was died because of some other illness apart from what the allegations are. But notwithstanding, the case has not been stopped and there's still investigation ongoing. So finally, according to medical records that came out, Ransford's death was caused as investigations still go on, but the information we have is that the medical records show that he died by some other illness and not necessarily the impact of what happened. But notwithstanding, as activists and advocates, we are still pushing for investigations into the allegations and to find out exactly what's happening. And of course, like we said, this raised a bigger issue about children at these sports academies and what is happening in them.
Right. If you've just tuned in, thank you very much for staying with us on the line with Robert Amoafo, who is a human rights advocate and also the former director of Amnesty International in Ghana. And we're talking about the case of Ransford Owusu Ansah, who tragically lost his life at the tender age of 16, allegedly at the abuse of his coach at the Siano Football Academy. Very, very sad story. I want to talk to you, Robert, about in your capacity as a human rights activist, I'm sure you are also very deeply involved in work that involves community development and also boys being outspoken about what is happening in these circles, not just on the football field, as it were. So let's talk about how issues around masculinity and talking about abuse are being dealt with in cases of this nature, or with young boys, as it were?
Yeah, I think key, like I said, this case has brought out a lot of issues that we need to pay attention to,
Mm.
especially listening to our boys and paying attention to them. We have always advocated that children should be treated as children and should be listened to as children. It doesn't matter what the gender may be. It's important that we pay attention to our children. Parents paying particular attention to their children. Of course, I mean, in this case as well, I was also interested in the participation of the family. How did Ransford get to the facility? Who inspected the facility before Ransford was there? What was the purpose of sending Ransford there? All these questions come up, and parenting as well, the responsibility of parents, and how we allow our children to participate in things that we may not have much information on. Because earlier, this case came up early in July when I heard about this, and it was more about the mother complaining about how the child got there through his uncle, and his uncle was talking about how there's an opportunity. And of course, as you may be aware, also this issue of poverty and how people try to look for opportunities wherever they may find them. So this all brings into the matter, like you mentioned, social development, community development, and protecting the most vulnerable in our society, notwithstanding the level of challenges that may be. Yeah.
All right. Lastly, just before we let you go, any ideas, I guess, as to the concrete steps that should be taken, particularly by the Ministry of Ghana and the Ghana Football Association? What steps can they take to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future?
I think first of all, the authorities in charge of these football academies must now pay particular attention. We should start looking at how do we protect children, key, and even not just children, but anyone in these football academies. As still society, we're not paying attention, of course, to some of these things, which means that now we need to pay attention on children who go into any of these academies, and even in schools, we need to pay attention to what is happening to children. And like you mentioned, now let's pay attention to educating our boys on sexual abuse. And when these things happen to them, they should not be raised up and say, I'm a boy and I'm a man, and so I should cover these things up. I should pay particular attention.
All right. Robert Amoafo joining me in his capacity as human rights advocate and former director of Amnesty International in Ghana. We are 4 minutes away from the top of the hour.
The voice of the continent, now online, with all your sports fixtures, lifestyle, and more. Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a